So this talk is called The Mastery of Emotion. It's something that I've been quite passionate about, and I've been delivering for quite a few years now. And I start off with the ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Ankabut. He says, do people think that they'll be left to say, we believe and they will not be tried? And then he continues to say, we'll try them like we tried those who came before them. And the whole concept of that entire ayah right there is that it's a rhetorical question. It doesn't really need an answer. The point is that, if it should instigate somebody to look back at their life and reflect and see why things have happened. So thankfully, I got a very nice introduction. MashaAllah, I don't usually get introductions. And the only thing I can really add to that is that I've been working in the Muslim student mental health work and wellbeing since about 2014. I went to King's and I graduated class of COVID-19. So you know how that was. And it was quite amazing actually. I remember I went to my elective, and then I went which was, I'll be very honest with you, it was a week in Turkey. Got a massage every day and went back home. And what happened is that then what's his name, Matt Hancock or somebody decided to send 5,500 medical students into the workforce final years, and I was like, yeah, I was okay with that because I'd already passed my exams. And guess where they threw me into? Straight into the intensive care unit in COVID and St Thomas's. So that was probably the highlight of my career so far. Everything's just going to be downhill from there. Now, my interests are Islamic, South Asian, male mental health. It's probably the only thing that I can say is reflected of me. I'm Islamic, South Asian, and interested in male mental health. Okay, let's go on. So let's get something very clear. Most people fail to actualize the reality of mental health. Everyone seems to have their own perceptions, from what they read, from what they're told, social media, news, etc. And everyone has their own biases, especially the ones who are sort of told stuff, and they tend to create their own sort of perceptions. You find is that when you talk about mental illnesses, most people, they're not able to understand just how it works. So the example I give here is a panic attack. A person who has a panic attack, it's like an uncontrollable fear it has as much control as somebody who's having an asthma attack. So Dr. Ahmed Hanki is a friend of mine. We had a conversation about this, and I think he put up a video recently where he talks about how somebody who's, imagine that you're on a train station and there's a really loud train coming your way, like the proper loud ones, not the ones you find in London. They come your way, and then you suddenly hear all shaking, noise, and stuff like that, and you anticipating it. It's all loud as it's come by, everything shaking, loads of noise. And similarly, you just got to ride it as similar. And that same with asthma attacks. When it's about to happen. And the whole concept here is that when it comes to panic attacks and asthma attacks, people tend to react differently, especially because they don't really know how to handle the situation. But the more we understand it, the better things get. Someone with an asthma attack, clearly you'll take them to see a medic, you know what to do. You'll be able to help them at that point in time. Panic attacks, most people don't really get it. Move on. So therefore, mental health illnesses, like other health issues, are tests from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're all given by Allah, and there's a reason for it. And therefore, as derivation, there's no dichotomy between Islam and mental health. Okay, meaning there is definitely an overlap. So if you look at the Quran and trials, sadness and trials are the central theme of so many stories in the Quran. And the whole concept of it all is that we look at those examples to take benefit from them. So if you look at the greatest of people, the prophets, alayhim salam, there was a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose them to be mentioned in the Quran. Now, if this was an active session, I would ask people how many prophets have been mentioned in the Quran. It's only a handful, about 24, 25, I believe, or depending upon who you consider to be a prophet. And then, but what's key is that if I then ask you how many prophets have there been in existence, the answer is 124,000 since the beginning, from Adam alayhi salam to the Prophet salam. And there's a reason why only a handful have been mentioned in the Quran. It's because their stories and their lives, the things that happen to them are relatable for everyone from the time of the Prophet salam till the end of time. And therefore, we need to take benefit from it, regardless of what the difficulties we experience. He said, The people that are tested the most severely are the prophets, and then the next best, and the next best, and the next best. And one is essentially tested in accordance to their status and in their religion. Okay, so let's talk about one prophet, Ayub. The Arabs, they have a very nice phrase. They call it Sabr Ayub. It's like something they say to try and sort of motivate somebody to sort of forbear, essentially. But most of them don't really understand where it sort of comes from. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, truly we found him patient, how excellent a slave. Verily he was ever oft returning in repentance to us. So he's already immortalized this man until the end of time about just how virtuous he was in terms of his patience. So Allah wanted to test this prophet who was in constant ibadah. He was known for his worship. So this was a prophet of Allah, known prophet of Allah. He had a family, lots of children, lots of wealth, lots of status. But the only thing that really mattered to him was his worship. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to test that to see just how firm he was. So at that point, like I mentioned, he had everything you could possibly want, but he would verbalize that he doesn't see any of that as important. The shaitan comes along and he says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, Ya Allah, give me permission to do stuff to him such that he will then waver in his worship. And Allah says, look, you may do whatever you please, but you cannot affect the knowledge of me which lies in his heart. For that I will not allow. And then Shaitan's like, okay, whatever. So he thinks about what could possibly be the most destructive thing a man can have to his life. And the best way to do that is to take away his offspring. So what Shaitan did is he sort of collated all of the children of Ayub in one building area and then collapsed the building, killing them all instantaneously. Naturally, Ayub was grieving, and so was his wife. But he did not waver in his worship, not once. And he just went back to it, and he continued through the grief. So Shaitan gets very, very angry again. This time, he asked Allah for permission one more time. He says, Ya Allah, let me inflict him with something so bad that he will definitely waver in his worship. And Allah says, you may do whatever you please, except affect the knowledge of me which lies in his heart. For that I do not give permission. And then Shaitan goes and affects him with something similar to leprosy. And what happened as a result of the illness is that he lost a lot of like muscle tone and essentially became like skin and bones. His skin started to scab over. He looked very weak. As a result, the people thought he was infectious, so they shunned him. He lost a lot of his wealth throughout, having to tear through it to try and sustain himself and his wife. And then his wife tried to get a job to try and help them both, but then they thought she was infectious as well. So at this point, he essentially nothing. Well, almost. What happened was that his wife had asked him, said, "Look, you are a prophet of Allah. Why don't you just ask Allah to remove this burden from you, and then everything will be okay again." And then Ayub gets very angry and he says, how long have I had all the blessings that Allah has given me? And she said, 70 years. It's like, okay, how long have I been suffering from this illness and the loss of my children? And she said, 7 years. It's like, well, why should I ask Allah to remove something that he has given me for less time than the goodness is given? I'm paraphrasing. And he gets very angry. They have a fight and they have an argument, and then she leaves. Now, at that point, he realizes that he has absolutely nothing now, which is quite a learning point for many elderly men that I speak to about this. They can take a lot of benefit from understanding the role of the women in their lives. But he realized he had nothing. So what he did is that he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for mercy. If you look at this ayah here, he says, verily distress has seized me, and you are the most merciful of those who show mercy. And so we answered his call and removed his distress, and we restored his family to him. Now, the tafsir of this ayah, they say that the angel was sent to him and said, we can either resurrect all of your children, or we can give you more children like them. And Ayub, he chose the latter option. The reason being is because he knows that those children that passed away are guaranteed paradise, and the ones that will come afterwards will be more that will worship Allah. And it's very difficult for many of us to understand this because, okay, objectively it makes sense. But then if imagine it was somebody that you loved. Yeah. Imagine it was your own child, your own parent, somebody very close to you. How much control or sort of sense of responsibility would you have to not do the selfish thing and ask for them to be resurrected? It's very difficult. And what had happened was that the angel came down, of course, told him this, and then he sort of told from the ground erupted a well, like some sort of water feature, and then he was told to bathe in it. So he bathed in the water that was spouting out, and then from there his illness was removed, the scabs were gone, he regained sort of like muscle tone and stuff like that. But what was the whole here? What was the whole point in this specific ayah? So we gave him a spring to wash in, etc. Strike the ground with your foot, give him a spring to wash in, and they gave him his family in this other version of the story in the Quran. But what had happened straight afterwards was that it was noticeable that he passed his 7-year-long test, and he was essentially naked in outside areas. And what happens is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored him. How? He sent a swarm of golden locusts. This literally golden colored or made out of gold locusts who came and covered every inch of his body. And Ayub realized what was happening, and he started to grab the loci, or whatever you want to call them, and put them on locusts, I think, and then started to cover his body even more. When he was asked why, he realized that this is a mercy from Allah, and he understood that he passed his test because the higher your status is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the eyes of Allah, the less naked or uncovered you should be in public. It's just how it is. If, for example, with Musa alayhi salam, there was with his people, generally speaking, he would wear really, really like baggy clothing and stuff that you wouldn't really see an inch of his skin. And people went round and spread a rumor saying he's probably got some illness or something, some deformity. Until one day he decided to bathe in like a public area, and then a man saw him and said that no, well, there's nothing wrong with him. But you see the concept that comes from this is that as your status increases, you know, so does your sort of relationship with Allah. Let's move on. Salam. The sadness of Yaqub. Now, Surah Yusuf is probably one of my favorite surah in the Quran, and it's the only surah of its length that was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ in one sitting. Okay, and I thoroughly enjoy it, and it's a beautiful story. We know exactly what's going to happen. It's like a typical movie-like thing, right? What I want to highlight first before we move on is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Allah has full power and control over his affairs, but the vast majority of people know not. Meaning that it's very easy to be fixated on one aspect of life in the present and then not look at the bigger picture. And Allah is reminding you that don't worry, I've got this no matter how it feels right now. But let me show you how it worked. What has happened, we know the story. Yaqub alayhi salam, Yusuf, he has a dream and he has a lot of like tensions with his brothers. The brothers hate him, they wanted to kill him. In the end, they said, no, let's throw him down a well, take his shirt, dip it in sheep's blood, tell dad that a wolf ate him. And then, they present the shirt to his dad, and dad says, how merciful a wolf, he ate my son but didn't tear the shirt. So naturally, they were very like, a bit, okay, they got caught out here. As it says here, nay, you, but your own selves have made up a tale, and I shall observe a beautiful patience. And it is Allah alone whose help can be sought against the lie which you assert. So we all know what's going to happen. Yusuf gets taken as a slave. He has he gets sold. Works in the house of one of the sort of the judges or the Aziz, or what you want to call him. And various things have happened to him. He gets thrown in prison. Realizes he can interpret dreams. Becomes a minister. Okay, it's like it's an amazing story. I would thoroughly recommend people study it. And then what happens is Yaqub, he decides he sees through the mercy, he sees through his sons. But when we focus on Surah Yusuf, we always focus on Yusuf. We don't look at what happens to Yaqub. Remember, this is a long time. It's a massive period of time where he's just lost his son, and to the point that he cries so much that he loses his eyesight. But Yaqub, he continues in his duties as a prophet. So he sees through his sons and resolves to prayer and asks for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yaqub has no idea what is happening to Yusuf. We all see what's happening because we're reading it and we know what's happening, etc. But he's just living his life day to day with holding onto this grief, onto this this sort of sadness, this intense feeling of non-control and being overwhelmed. And what then happens is that many years later, there's a famine as predicted, and he's made a minister, and everyone's told to come get their rations. So what happens is that the sons they all go to get their rations. Now Yusuf looks very different at this point in time. It's been many years, and he recognizes them all, and he says to them, "Look, you can take your rations, but you're leaving Binyamin with me, and there's no choice in the matter. I'm a minister. I can do whatever I want." And so the brothers, they're horrified. They saw what the consequence of their previous action was, to essentially get rid of a son of their father and how it affected their family. Now it happens again. So they go back and tell their father, and they're like, "Oh, Father, this is what happened." And they were being very honest about it. So then Yaqub, he says, "No, your own selves have beguiled you into something. So I shall observe a beautiful patience, and maybe Allah will bring them both or all back to me. Truly He, only He, is all-knowing and all-wise." So a second calamity, a massive thing. How's he focusing on it? He says, "I shall observe a beautiful patience." On both occasions he said that. In the end, Yusuf and his family reunite in Egypt, or that area. Yaqub, he was blind, and Yusuf come back to him and says, "Look, here's a shirt. Wipe your eyes with that shirt, and your sight will come back." And it did. What was the whole point of that test? The whole point of that test is highlighted in this ayah here. So when they asked Yaqub, so Yaqub alayhi salam was dying on his deathbed, and he asked his sons, "Who will you worship after me?" And they said, "Well, we will worship your God, the Lord of your father, Ibrahim, Ismail, Ishaq, the one God, and we submit to him in Islam." And this is all of his sons around his bed, by the way, the deathbed. And what had happened is that this family that was so fragmented, and had this tension between them, and lots of hardship and difficulties, is now closer than ever before. And that was the whole purpose behind the whole this whole story. It's gone from something really, really bad to something amazing, and it took time, but it happened, and it was thoroughly worth it. So there's something. You have two top worshippers tested for their worship, both tried with long-term calamities, both felt the effects physically, dealt with running, and hope for mercy, not a solution. When they went back to their worship, they asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for mercy and not the solution. Mercy will always give you far more than the solution. Remember, Allah's rahmah, it's significantly more than His punishments and the difficulties that He gives. And there's a reason why for every difficulty there are two eases. Now, the purpose of trials, when you're going through difficulties and Allah is testing how much you are convinced and have conviction in His decree, it's very easy to then, worship. So, for example, you can watch a very nice Nur Ali Khan video, Mufti Make video, whatever, get a massive sort of iman boost, okay? And you go into your worship, you pray your tahajjud, you do all of this X, Y, Z, good deeds, which is great. But then, would you continue? Should things really get bad? Are you the type of person that is so firm in their worship that no matter what comes your way, you will be unwavering? And that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tests you based upon your abilities. It's just there to see. It gives the tests for you to see for yourself just how close you are to him. Because we all give lip service, we all give all that stuff, lots of yapping, but we don't actually have substance necessarily. And the whole concept of it all is to try and get that. And we'll talk about that a bit more, inshallah. Mastery of emotion. Uh, a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, "Okay, give me some advice." And the Prophet ﷺ said, "La taghdab, don't get angry." And the man asked again, and the Prophet ﷺ said, "La taghdab, don't get angry." And it kept going for a bit. So, my dearest brothers and sisters, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Don't get angry." Does that mean we don't get angry? I mean, this would be another interactive question, but COVID. The answer is yes and no. Okay, the no here is where the Prophet ﷺ, when he says "don't get angry," in this circumstance, he's referring to rage, because rage is a form of anger which is uncontrolled, and people can even get to a point where they black out and they just do stuff and have no recollection of it whatsoever. Anger itself is an emotion that somebody can't necessarily control. Let's move on. Another hadith was, some said, the powerful man is not the one who can wrestle. The powerful man is the one who can control himself at a time of anger. Of course, this applies to women as well. It's very important that you understand this. It's about being able to channel said emotions. So, concept in usul al-fiqh of our religion, okay, that you're not really accountable for the things that you think or feel. You are not accountable for it. It's what you do with it. So do you, as actions, remember the Prophet ﷺ, the most dangerous thing to a person was their tongue, as an action of what they think or feel. You could choose not to say anything. You could choose not to do anything. That's what the key is. There was I don't know if you guys know about this thing. So when I was in my first year at King's, there were a bunch of final years, fourth years, that that decided to. They were sitting in a gathering and they were saying, you know what, the conflict in Syria at this point had hit a massive peak, was getting very bad, and they were very angry that nothing was being done. So they said, okay, what can we do? And that year they decided to establish a charity, an organization called Students for Syria. These are probably some of the most like elite brothers I've ever met, and they're all like doing amazing things now. But that charity every year generates thousands upon thousands of pounds for aid to Syria, as well as the functioning of the Jordanian refugee camp. And all it took was for a bunch of people to get angry and decide to do something productive. So do you see? Is the key here to take the key to mastering emotion is to take a very raw emotion and turn it into something good, or at the very least stop it from turning into something bad. That's what the key is. So this also accounts for sadness. The Prophet ﷺ was not allowed to have a male heir for many reasons, but he did have three sons throughout his the seerah. They all died very young, and the last one that was born was Ibrahim. Okay, when he was born, the Prophet ﷺ cried, knowing that he wasn't going to be staying very long. And at the age of 2 years old, Ibrahim passed away. He passed away, and the Prophet ﷺ was inconsolable. Okay, and to the point that he said, "The eyes send their tears, and the heart is saddened, but we do not say anything except that which pleases our Lord. Indeed, O Ibrahim, we are saddened by your departure from us." And then, literally immediately after that happened, there was a solar eclipse, and then people were asking the Prophet ﷺ, is this a sign? Is this some sort of something special? And the Prophet ﷺ could have easily just said, yes, it is, which would have been wrong. Or he could have just not said anything at all and let the people assume things, because he's clearly very emotional at this point in time, very, very hurt, very weepy. But he said, no, these eclipses, solar and lunar eclipses, are signs from Allah. Establish the prayer. Now, the level of control as a person you need to be able to fulfill said responsibility at the moment of severe calamity and difficulty is not something that comes easily. It requires years and years of hardship and overcoming and a resilience beyond compare. Let's keep on talking. So the Battle of Tabuk. Okay. Four companions I want to talk about. First one is Abu Malik and the second is Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. Now, what had happened is that these two gentlemen were at this point very early on in their Islam. Okay, and everyone was ready for battle. They all got on their stuff and left. Both of these companions overslept. Okay, Ka'ab, he woke up and he was like, oh, I missed it. Oh, I'll catch the next one. All right. Abu Dhar, on the other hand, he got up. He was like, "Oh no, I got to get ready." He grabbed all of his stuff, whatever he could, got on his riding beast, and went to try and catch up. The Muslims set up camp, and the Prophet ﷺ was walking around the entire camp, and he was just looking around amongst thousands of his companions, and he just noticed, "Where is Ka'b ibn Malik? Where is Abu Dhar al-Ghifari?" And he just noticed where those two were not there. And he looks into the distance and he sees somebody riding very quickly towards them. And he supplicates to Allah and says, Ya Allah, let it be Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. And it was. Okay? And it was. Now, guess who narrates this hadith? Ka'b narrates this hadith. And every time he narrates this hadith, he's very upset by it all. Because remember, he was very, very junior in his Islam at this point. Now, when he's narrating hadith after the Prophet passed away, he's very, very, very sad by it, very inconsolable. But obviously, it's something that he feels a responsibility to tell. And I think we can all take a lesson from that, In Sha Allah. There's two more companions who are actually unnamed. What happened is that they came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, Ya Rasulullah, we want to sacrifice for the sake of Allah, but we don't have any riding beasts. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, look, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry, but I don't have anything for you. So they turned their backs while their eyes overflowed and tears out of grief, so that they could because they couldn't find anything to spend for the sake of Allah. And this moment right here was so beautiful to Allah that He immortalizes it in an ayah in the Quran. There's just one moment where they wish they could have done something, but because of circumstances they couldn't. And it's amazing to look at the differences in these companions and how they sort of developed over time. Something that we should really, really benefit from in the future. So Malik bin Dinar, actually, how much time do I have? I feel like I talk forever. Goodness, not long at all. Right, Malik bin Dinar, he says, heart that does not feel sadness is like a derelict home, meaning it's dirty and dusty, it hasn't been looked after, it's not really maintained well. Okay, think of it as like student accommodation. All right. And the argument is, how do you feel close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you're not somebody who deems himself emotionally active? Which you can understand given the nature of what we were talking about. But the lesson is like, how true is this? The Prophet ﷺ, he said something. He said, if you knew what I know, sorry, at that time, if you knew what I know, you would cry much and laugh little. Yeah. But did he actually cry much and laugh little? No. He was known to be the most optimistic person. He would smile the most. He would be somebody who would always be positive and share good vibes around with everyone, even though he knows stuff that would destroy and crumble all of us. Now, you have to ask yourself why. And if you look at the trials that the Prophet ﷺ has faced, he faced every trial: loss of guardians, loss of spouse, loss of children, loss of wealth, health. His loved ones were mutilated. He's affected by magic. He was boycotted by his own people. He was physically harmed at one point. Stoned by children, etc. Called names, slandered. And when somebody goes through so many difficulties and overcomes them, the difficulties themselves develop the person. It shapes the personality. There's a whole theory about it on terms of what you define the personality in psychology, but I really ain't got time. So let's move on. Okay, and the reason why I talk about, just before I move on, just the reason why I mention the Prophet ﷺ here is a lot of people love him very much, very much. and with every right to, and we should, because of what he's experienced and what we learned from him and the stuff we benefit from him. So we always send salawat upon our Prophet, alayhi salam. But remember, love for the Prophet isn't enough to save you, because Abu Talib loved the Prophet a lot, and it didn't save him. Just something to think about. When it comes to sadness, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions sadness in the Quran, it's usually to negate it. Okay? So when Allah talks about the people who enter paradise, they says they will not fear, and they will not be of those who feel sadness. Okay? So although he's mentioning it, he's negating it. They do feel it, but trying to remove it. Okay? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, it says, Alhamdulillah alladhi adhaba an al-hazan. Yeah, the people, literally these people that enter paradise, they've entered both feet in paradise, and they say, Alhamdulillah, for the one who removed from us all the sorrow. Meaning that these people that that have entered paradise, that Allah is narrating what they're going to say, by the way, they're already better than us. Okay, but it means that during their lifespan, and of course, and obviously on the plain of Arafah, they experience intense sadness during their life in this dunya. But then when they enter paradise, it's removed from them. Okay? This is very important. So sadness is not something that you should want to be in. Okay? This is something that you should actively try and remove, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It does not mean that it's wrong to feel. And the emotions that we feel is not wrong to feel. It's wrong to not try and remove the negative ones, if that makes sense. And a way to do that is to have a correct mindset. The Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith, he says, don't look at those more fortunate than you, look at those less fortunate, and then that will make it less likely to belittle the blessings of Allah. And this is important because it's not a generic, it's not a must do, it's a guideline for you to understand. The correct mentality is to always be in the positive mindset and understand what's good and understand what you have, and therefore be grateful for it. This is what the key is. And the ones that have a lot of emotions and a lot of overwhelming sort of feelings, they tend to focus on the negative. Okay, we'll go on to that, inshallah. So my experience with depression, anxiety, I call this a reluctant account of untimely events, because when I first was asked to deliver this back in 2015, I want to say, I was just the brother said to me, look, Sultan, do you want to talk about your experience? I'm like, not really. I don't want to. I don't understand why you're asking me to, because he said, oh, people will benefit. I'm just like, I'm not doing it. It's like, you're doing it. I was like, I'm not doing it. It's like, you're doing it. I was like, okay. And that's how it went. Okay, that's literally how things go at Kings. You just get told to do something, you just do it. Right. So before I begin, there's these two images that I like to share. And the one on the left with the burnt person is what I deem to be depression, and the one on the right is what I would deem to be like sort of anxiety. That would be how I would sort of depict it in an image, if I could. Maybe you can relate to it. What happened? A little bit of background. Oh, by the way, I'm just going to give a trigger warning. I'm going to talk about very sensitive stuff now, and I don't want, if anyone feels uncomfortable at any point, take a break, leave, whatever. I won't be upset or anything like that, okay? So, a bit of background. I am the son of a single mother, the eldest son of 3. And I grew up in an incredibly violent and abusive household. My father was domestically violent towards my mother, literally all my life when I was younger. And I remember like one of my earliest memories was just watching my mum being thrown around the room. That's just how it was, actually. He would come in, my mum he would go for work, and my mum would lock the door, and then he would be forced to go back to his mother's house, and then they'll reconcile, and he'll come in and out of our life. But the same thing would happen over and over again. He'll come back, act good for a couple of weeks, and then argue, and they'll fight again, and so on and so forth. And the thing is, nobody did anything about it. Like, everyone knew it was happening, as in I'm talking about like other family members, etc. Everyone knew it was happening, but no one did anything about it, to the point that I thought that this was a normal marital relationship where a man would just where a man would just abuse his partner. And this is very and I became quite desensitized to it. Now, what happened was when I was about 7 years old, um, my mum developed chronic severe depression, and her symptoms were very bad. She had all the physical stuff and the psychological stuff. So obviously she was low all the time, tired all the time, not enjoying anything, not barely functioning. And the physical stuff, she was in bed almost for about 20 hours a day or so, only getting up to like sort of cook food so me and my younger brothers wouldn't starve. And now at this point in time, if I was 7, they would have been what, 2 and 3. And so my job as a 7-year-old was to make sure that they were fed, watered, clothed, bathed. I would just do all of that. My mum would need like sort of regular massages to sort of relieve the pain that she would feel physically. Anyway, so that was my responsibility. I tended to just do work at home. And I remember like trying to talk to my teachers and stuff about it in the past, but they don't really understand. So anyway, moving on. When I was about 10 years old, again, my dad came back into our life. And I remember that my mum and dad, they had a fight the night before. Now, at this point in time, my job, okay, was to hide my siblings whenever I thought something was going to kick off. So for about 4 or 5 years of my life, every time something was going to kick off, I took my siblings, took them upstairs, hid them under a bed. Okay, that's why if you were to go speak to them today, they actually have no memory of anything. So that was my job. And one day, my mum and my dad had an argument at night, and he sort of pinned her up by the throat up against the wall, and it caused her a lot of pain. Now, the following morning, she did her normal, oh, I'm sorry, forgive me, etc. The sort of the routine she needs to do to reconcile and not be beaten again. And I remember she had like red marks on her neck. So I come back from school. Actually, no, I don't come back from school. I was in school, and my mum turns up to school, and she's like, Sultan, I can't take it anymore. We need to leave. And I was like, okay. And I mean, I didn't know much better. I was 10 years old. My brothers were younger. So we had an hour to pack what we could and get out. We literally, I packed a bag each, and then we had like £100 in our pocket, and we were gone. And that was, from there, we were homeless. We didn't have a place to stay. And we used to couch surf, move from place to place to place. There was like accommodations and essentially being homeless for ages. Many people have moved homes and they know how stressful it is. I've moved homes like 8 times before recently. I never used to stay in a place for more than about a year and a half. I think that was the longest I've ever stayed in one place, between the ages of 10 and things. Going to some of the worst schools in the country. I remember I went to my secondary school was so bad that I had like a 24% 5A starter C rate at GCSE level. Like that meant like 76% couldn't get 5 Cs. It was that rough. You had to you had to fight to just survive there. But you just dealt with it. Now, when I was 10, obviously we left the house. My mum's English is terrible. She couldn't speak a word of it. Okay, Bengali women, from home, she wasn't really educated, etc. My dad stopped her from going to classes and stuff when she was living with him. So her English was terrible. So as a result, I had to run everything. As a 10-year-old, I had to do all the sort of the letters, the booking stuff for like household repairs, making sure the shopping was done, etc., etc. Take myself to school, take my brothers to school, bring them back, go to parents' evenings, etc. And it's just how I was since I was about 10, right? And that's just how I sort of survived. And then fast forward like a few years, I find myself in medical school. Don't know how that happened. It just did happen. And that was great. So I turned up in medical school, and I was doing the normal rebellious thing for any child that has significant trauma. I didn't, I applied for only King's to be in a London university just to appease my mum. The rest of them were outside of London because I didn't want to be at home We all know that feeling where you don't want to be at home. And I applied for London. I got straight rejections from all of the other places except London. Kings. I applied for some proper like random unis as well, right? And the reason why my mum made dua every night for like 2 months straight that I stay in London. I didn't expect that to happen. So I got straight rejections. I thought, okay, I'll probably have to reapply or something. And then Kings give me an offer. I'm like, mad. So then what happens is I'm in my first year. My mum and my brothers, they go on Hajj. Now, I didn't go because, like an idiot, I thought lectures matter in October in my first year, right? So I was like, oh my gosh, I can't remember cells and organelles, the normal dumb stuff, right? And I didn't go. I think I should have like idiot across my forehead. Anyway, so I didn't go. And so they went for 3 weeks and then they came back. And my brother was all like holy and stuff at that point, the Hajj high, I'm so connected to Allah and I will never do anything wrong ever again in my life. And, I want you to be good as well. That holiness. So he came up to me and he was like to me, and he said to me, Borobai, listen, we need to forgive our father. At that point, I got so angry. I was like, what? How dare you suggest such a thing? You weren't there when all the violence was happening. You don't remember because I protected you. I was the one who raised the household. You didn't have to lift a finger, nothing. I was the one who dealt with all of the hardship, all of the abuse, the racism, the bullying, everything that we faced since we left. And you wanted me to forgive the guy who caused it all? Look what he did to mum. And then he said, I know, but like he's still our father. And I said, get out of here, I'm not talking to you. So he's gone. Like I'm not paying attention to him anymore. And then of course what normally happens, King's CUISoc, you turn up, they drag you into the prayer room, they say, hey, let's go eat. And that's how it starts. You just eat and just keep eating. And I came into religion from then. And I thought to myself, okay, maybe he's got a point. So I went to my sheikh. Now my sheikh, he lives in my building, and he's known my family since I was about 15, 16. We moved into Victoria, where I live in London, and we've been there since I was about 16ish. Okay. And what then happened was, I spoke to my sheikh. We were in the car, and I was like to him, sheikh, just be real with me, yeah. Am I in any sin for not wanting anything to do with this man? And of course, it's a very sticky situation to put the sheikh into. Like, he knows what's happened. It's a very, very difficult answer to give. And he looked at me and he said to me, look, Sultan, I know what's happened, but try. And if he doesn't reciprocate, then it's not your fault. And at this point in time, I was more concerned about my akhirah. That's the reason why I wanted to do it. So I was like, okay, fine. So at that point in time, we had a family therapist. And via her, for my mum, and via her, we set up a meeting with this guy. Now, it's been 10 years at this point. Okay, 10 years since I last saw him. Wait, how long do I have? Yeah, time. Right. So 10 years since I last saw him. And I was ready. I was sitting in the room and I was ready to launch myself at him and unleash 10 years of anger. I was no longer that scared little 10-year-old that he used to terrify, and you can imagine just how affected he was, because after the event, after the event had happened that day when I met him, I went to my mum and she was like, oh, so what's he like? How tall is he? I'm like, Mum, he's about my height. I said, no, surely not. He's significantly taller. And when people have been abused that long, and they see their sort of, and they haven't seen their abuser for a long time, they create perceptions of them. Anyway, so on that day, he walked into the room. I was ready. I was going to unleash everything. And then he was just, all I saw was this frail old man who walked in, and I was like, and all the anger just sort of went, and I was just curious. I was like, what happened to you? And he's like, look, when you and your mother and your brothers left me, it tore me apart. And I was like, why? Is that, well, obviously nobody wants to lose their children and their spouse. But then what would happen? I was staying in a 3-bedroom house on my own every day. I'd go to work at 6 a.m. I'd come home at 6 p.m. I'd have a cup of tea and a biscuit. I'd barely eat, barely function, barely sleep. And then what would happen? People would talk. I couldn't go to weddings or funerals or any function without people bringing up the topic of my family, and it would cause me pain all the time. And he went through a massive depressive episode to the point that his brother had to drive up from London to collect him, take him home to try and help him. And then I felt really sorry for him. And then what happened? During this period of time, I was very overwhelmed trying to uh, fix the meeting, have the meeting, recover from the meeting, arrange another meeting. This all took time, right? And this was closer to the exam period I had, and I really couldn't study. And then what also happened was that one of the brothers, the ex-head brother, he's like to me, Sultan, like, let's go Chicken Cottage. I'll buy you lunch. I'm like, safe. I'm happy to take a free meal anytime. So he takes me to Chicken Cottage and he sits me down somewhere that I can't run away from. And he sits me in this corner. And he just says to me, "So how have you found ISOC?" And I said, "Oh, it's been great, man." It's like, "Oh, how would you change things?" I'm like, "Yeah, well, I'll do more socials. I like socials." So, "Oh, okay, good. So you're the new head brother." I said, "No, no, no, I'm not doing it." I said, "Yeah, you're doing it." I said, "No, no, I'm not doing it." It's like, "You're doing it." I was like, "I can't do it." And he's like, "Have you done istikhara?" I was like, "No." It's like, "Well, go do istikhara." I was like, "Okay." So I went, I did istikhara. Nothing, like I didn't, nothing happened. So it couldn't influence my decision. So I took the position as head brother. Now that, on top of dealing with my father's side, I couldn't bring myself to study. I really couldn't. I couldn't focus, couldn't do anything. As a result, I failed my May exams. Well, I failed a May exam. Resit in August, thought, okay, one exam shouldn't be that difficult. It got worse. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think. I was tired. And then I failed it again. And then I get a letter from the medical school saying, "That's it, you're out. You not only are you out of medical school, you can never come back to any UK medical school." And at that point, it all set in. This is when it got okay. I remember because I thought to myself, because for many people, failing medical school, getting kicked out, not really an issue. You just apply and do something else, right? For me, if I didn't succeed at medical school, I would not be able to provide for my family. Like even now, I know that when I'm as a doctor, when I graduate, I'll be responsible for contributing towards the household costs, even now. And if I don't, then my mum suffers, my brothers suffer. And I thought to myself, I failed them. And then the thoughts came about, the thoughts which were saying, you have failed them. Why are you just using up resources? End your life. It's not worth you living. So I remember one of the lowest nights of my life. It was about 3 in the morning. I wasn't able to sleep because the anxiety and the depression was just, it was keeping me up all the time. Even though I was tired and exhausted. And I was we live on a 6th floor of a building, so I was by the balcony. And what happened was, it's silent because nobody's around me, and these thoughts were going through my head, saying, "Look, you failed. It's not worth your life anymore. You might as well just end it." And I was rocking back and forth over the balcony. And the first time that night, I didn't do it. Why? Because I remembered the hadith of the one who ends his life. He'll be resurrected in that manner. I didn't want to be resurrected falling 6 flights off a building. And then I found myself there again the next night. Same thoughts, even more intense, louder. And then I almost did it, and I looked at myself. I thought, wait, is 6 floors high enough? And that's the one thing that you need to know about men, is that when they're suicidal, they want to end their life. So I didn't do it because I thought 6 floors isn't high enough. I went to bed. I woke up again in the morning, and then I was like to myself, you know what? Today I'm going to do it. I'm just delaying the inevitable. And then what happens is I get a phone call, and it's my friends. They're from Kings. They like to me, hey, Sultan, are you on campus? I said, no, I'm not on campus. I'm at home. So okay, come to campus. We're all here. And then I was like, oh no, I'm not feeling it. This. I was making some nonsense excuse, and they were like, oh okay, all right, we're coming to you. I was like, no, don't do that. It's just I can't come out. I've got this. I was like, no, it's too late. We're coming. So for the first time in about 3.5 months, I got ready presentably and left the house. At this point in time, my anxiety was so high, I couldn't leave my bedroom, let alone leave my house to go just down the shops to get milk, because that thought of that alone was so overwhelming. I just couldn't function. I had to make up excuses when my mum was telling me to do X, Y, Z. And my mum was very supportive about it all. My family all knew about the failure, but I didn't feel good about it. Anyway, so my friends called me and I said to come outside. So I come outside, and we spend a day in Battersea Park. And you call your mandem and they come and support you. That's probably the most unique experience that any man can have, when you have boys that will just not judge you and just turn up and then support you how you need. So when you call your mandatory support network, this was the day, right? And some of these people are probably the greatest friends I've ever had, and to this day we're pretty close. Now, if you look at me in that picture, all those kilograms ago, do I look like I was suicidal? Not really, right? And I was that the night before I was going to do it. It was going to happen. And if these guys didn't turn up, I would probably not be here today. Because what happened then is then I realized, you know what, I need help. I sought help. Went to my GP. Went to the family therapist. You wrote to the university. Did everything. I appealed to university and won my appeal. And they said, okay, you can come back and repeat a year. And I was like, okay, alhamdulillah. What was the whole point of all of that? Because then I was back in medical school. Okay. And what changed? Well, the first thing that changed is that my father and I have a very good relationship. He's a completely different man. Completely. He remarried. In fact, in that meeting that I was talking about, he was more concerned with justifying, trying to explain to me why he remarried. Now, as a man, I understand why he remarried. A man needs his wife, and he remarried, and he's very different. And as a result of that marriage, I now have a sister who is, I'm like 21 years older than. I'm literally older than, old enough to be her dad. It's actually it's terrifying. Now, I'm very happy with that. I have a very good functioning relationship. He's very supported. He's supported me all these years, and I have no problem with that. My parents keep separate, as they should, because my mom's still very unwell. But they're involved in my life. That's one benefit. I thought something that was irreconcilable. I don't know the word in English, right? That something that was just not fixable, yeah, became possible. And the other thing that happened was that the ex head brother. So obviously, because I failed the exams, the head brothership went on to somebody else, which was alhamdulillah. I was so happy about that, right? Now the ex head brother who told me he stayed on and he to do a another project, and this was called the King's Welfare Project. When we started, it was about four of us, me, him, and two other sisters, right? Them three were the visionaries, and I was the sideman. And the reason why I joined that project of his to sort of start was because I realized that I didn't want anyone in university to go through what I went through alone. And it's true, because remember, how many years are your degrees? 3, 4, 5, 6 years, more than that even. And anything can happen in that time frame. It's a long time. People suffer alone in silence. So that's why we created the CUISoc Welfare Project. And since then, it's been going very well, alhamdulillah. So now I understood why. And obviously I did all that work. Then I went on to now create my own sort of work and do talks like this. Now I hadn't had one I had not gone through such a traumatic childhood, to not had that suicidal episode, all the work that is happening from the Afia project and all the stuff that's happening would not have happened. All the people that we've helped would never have happened. And it's only now that I look back and I think, you know what? I would fail that exam every day, any day, because I know the benefit that came with it. And I have been blessed with the being able to be shown why things happen to me. Yeah. So empathy. We were talking about the Battle of Tabuk and how many thousands of people there were, and the Prophet ﷺ noticing 2 people were missing. You know, is how well do you know your friends, the people around you? My friends recognized that I was not acting the same. They didn't see me for ages. I was not responding on social media, on like WhatsApp and Telegram, what we were on, and I wasn't responding to phone calls and stuff, and just generally being distant. And they realized something was wrong. Okay. And as a result, they came to my assistance. So you have to ask yourselves, my dear brothers and sisters, how well do you know your friends? How well do you know the brother and there's the Muslims around you? And you spot when certain behavior is odd. Medic, for me, like me, it might be something major like missing clinics or lectures or whatever for a whole week that they don't show up without a word. Or it could be something as minor as they stop praying their sunnah in the prayer room. And we'll talk about that later. So most people, they don't know how to express love. Now, this guy, um, what's his name? Something Chapman, Gary Chapman. He wrote a book called The 5 Love Languages, and in my genuine opinion, he took 5 hadith and just wrote a book on it, right? And what you find, okay, if we break down the 5, this guy made so much money off just anyway, right? So let's look at the 5 languages. So firstly, receiving gifts. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, give gifts, because gifts spread what? They spread love, right? And that's a very, very simple way of showing affection. Okay. Quality time. The Prophet ﷺ at one point had 8 wives at one moment, right? And a portion of his day had to be dedicated to each individual one, right? As well as being a full-time prophet. Now, when he passed away, not a single one of them would say that at any point that he neglected them. And then other sort of moments where there was a companion who genuinely felt so loved by the Prophet ﷺ, by the amount of attention and quality time he gave him, that he said, you know what, let me test it out. He came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, okay, who's the most beloved to you? And he said, Aisha. I said, okay, fine, okay, you're going to say your wife, obviously, I get that, but of the men, who's the most beloved to you? And he said, Abuha, her father. And he was like, oh, so surprised. And why? Because if you look at some of the soft skills that Prophet ﷺ had, he would turn to face you when you spoke to him, and that he would always be positive. He spoke softly. He would always be on a level with you. Why? And that's just how he would be as spending quality time. That's another one. Words of affirmation. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Speak a good word or keep silent." And then he also Anas. He said, "I served the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years, and not once did he say to me, 'Oh, why did you do this?' or, 'Why didn't you do that?' Not once. It's just how he was. Always positive, always motivating. Acts of service and devotion, as we know, for some reason, the people tend to go to the Prophet ﷺ for stuff. And he's a full-time prophet. It pays nothing, right? It's just how it was. But he would go out of his way to help you no matter what. Whatever he could do, he would just do it. And of course, the physical touch. The Prophet ﷺ was known to, like, he one time he picked up a boy, and kissed him on the forehead and put him down. And this Bedouin, he looked at him and was like, "You kiss children?" He's like, "Yeah, of course, I show them affection." And then he's like, "Well, I have 10 children. I've never shown any of them. I've never kissed a single one of them." And then Prophet ﷺ looked at him and he said, "What can I do if Allah has taken the mercy out of your heart?" And most of us, we don't really think about just how important the physical touch is. This is why pre-COVID, right, a lot of brothers, they would like give each other a hug, right? And this is very important because everyone knows that one brother with a really warm hug. We all know him. We greet him in the prayer room. He's very warm. I don't know how it works with sisters, right? But when it comes to brothers, it's really warm. And if you don't know who it is, it's probably you. Now, let's move on. It's very normal for the companions to express love to one another in a halal manner. It's just how it used to be. They used to just do stuff like that, and we've stopped really empathizing and showing affection to one another properly. It's just how we've become as a society. It's very individualistic. Okay. So how do you help someone that's suffering? Firstly, you need to recognize the issue and you need to get them to recognize the issue. Okay. You're not going to recognize the issue if you don't know them well enough to spot when something's wrong. And then you have to get them to understand. Okay. And then you have to ask them in a correct manner. Now, this is very important that you change your speech based upon the audience that you have. How long do I have? Yeah, I've got some time. Right. The Prophet ﷺ once was approached by a man who was a Bedouin. He just walked through the crowd of companions, of like big shot companions, and he was like shouting, "Where is Muhammad? Where is Muhammad?" And everyone's like, "Why is he talking like that?" And then out of nowhere, you hear, "I'm over here," in the same voice. And then they had a conversation like loudly, and the Bedouin left happy, right? And everyone was a bit weirded out because remember the Prophet ﷺ, most classy person, came from a noble family, etc., would hold himself to a high esteem. But with this person, he changed his discourse to fit the audience. And the gentleman was very happy with the consultation or whatever, and the answers that he got. Similarly, for yourselves, if you're talking to somebody who is younger or the same age as you or something, the best example I give you, you know, if a roadman comes up to me and is like, "Yo, bro, listen, uh, things in my life kind of peak still, you know." I'm like, and if I respond to him like I'm a BBC News presenter, it's just not gonna work, is it? And vice versa as well, right? It's important that you make yourself at the same level as the person so they're able to connect with you. Because, you know, if they're not able to connect with you, you're not going to be able to help them in the best manner. But find out the extent of the issue. It might be the last time they talk to you or open to anyone. So, you know, find out what's happening and get help. And if it's an emergency, if they're going to do something crazy, call 999. If they're not going to do something crazy and there's time, take them to their GP. Yeah. Or if you can, or do something, whatever you can do. You know, obviously these are guidelines. Each individual situation will require your judgment. Okay. Positive encouragement and reassurance. Now, people that suffer from mental illness, especially like anxieties and stuff, they will never not be benefited if you keep reassuring them. You know, just say, you know, you're doing really well. You know, I'm so happy with your progress. It's okay. You know, I'm here for you. You know, let's talk, etc. You know, I can see clear. You know, I can see that you're improving. You might not see it, but I see it. Stuff like that. And it's very important that you give that sort of reassurance to them because they don't have the mental state or the mood state to be able to do that themselves like we do ourselves. Okay. Very important. Remember, they're a human being, not a mental health case. You know, I've known people to address people as, "Oh, this is the brother with the with this with like depression," or "This is the sister with the eating disorder." You know, you wouldn't like me if I was to come up to you and be like, "Hey, that's sister blood pressure or uncle diabetes." You know, you have to be, you know, they're human. You can look past the illnesses. Very important. Listen attentively and be trustworthy. Prophet Sam said that return trust to those who entrusted you and do not betray those who betrayed you. So if somebody comes to you and tells you something very deep and personal, don't go around and talk about it, even anonymously. This happened once before. When I was in 2016, I think there was a gentleman who, brother from uni, he divulged some very personal information to an individual, and then that individual went around saying, "Oh yeah, do you know there's a person at our uni doing this XYZ who has this issue." And then it went round and it came back to that original brother, and then he stopped seeking help and stopped trusting people for ages. I remember having to work with this guy for a long time. But all it takes is just one idiot to open their mouth and not understand the repercussions of their actions. The most important thing, oh my gosh, make dua for them because you don't know, your dua just might be what saves them. There was this, you know, one of the how I mentioned there were 4 people that founded the welfare team. One of those sisters, right? She's a bit older than me. I swear to you, every time she made a dua, it would just happen. every time. It was like this. She was just like super powered. I remember just regularly emailing her for stuff, right? It just happened, right? It was amazing. But you don't know, man. Like Adaiya is so powerful. It's subhanallah. Reality, very important. Someone has abandoned the salah, they've lost sight of what's good for them. Okay, then they've lost sight of what they should be grateful about. I know I've written they're ungrateful, but that's not what I mean. I don't mean in a negative sense. It means they've lost sight of it. And bad things will happen. I've seen it. Men who stop praying and their lives turn upside down. It was insane. All right. Allah, our prayers protect us. That's how it works. So protect them. It's very important. But remember, so when somebody is unwell, they're not able to do that. Like when I was going through my depressive episodes, prayer was the last thing on my mind. Okay, it was really hard and I realized it afterwards how it affected me. If you abandon your adhkar, make sure you do your adhkar, morning and evening adhkar. You can all find that in Hisn Muslim. Very important, protects you from all the the shar, the evils in this dunya. Um, very important, of course, the Quran. It's the one thing that connects us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you don't have a daily portion of Quran in your life, your heart will become very hard very quickly, which can be undone with a lot of istighfar. But that's another thing we can talk about in the future. The Prophet ﷺ, he said something amazing. He said, from your dunya, women and fragrance have been made dear to me, but the true coolness of my eyes is the salah, the one thing that doesn't compare to anything else. Everything else is a non-issue. Is the salah is the one thing that I cannot not love. It's the one thing I cannot not love, essentially. Why? So Ibn Qayyim, he mentions 5 types of people in prayer. Okay? And what happens is, just before I begin, there's often what you find is when people they come to me and they're like, "Oh, Sultan, I need some help," and then we talk about it. And I say, "Okay," and I just explore stuff with them. So, okay, so how are you doing, deen wise, and like, how's your connection to Allah? That's my question: is how's your connection to Allah? And they say, "Yeah, bro, I pray, I fast, I give in charity and all that stuff. It's just still not doing it for me." I'm like, "Bro, that's not what I asked you. I asked you, how is your connection to Allah?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" And then I have to explain this. So Ibn Qayyim, he mentions 5 types of people who pray. The first one is the one who wrongs himself or herself and is in neglect. They may do his wudu wrong, they may not pray correctly or do all the necessary parts. And from a third person perspective, it's obvious that they're doing something wrong. Okay, if you were to observe them as a third party, you know that there's something wrong. Second type of person outwardly looks like they're doing things right. So you and the angels on our shoulders won't be able to differentiate what's happening with this person. So they pray on time, they do wudu and stuff, but they've already lost the battle with shaitan. They can't focus, they're not thinking. Okay? And it becomes robotic. And all that happens is that, they sort of the sin is sort of removed from them, but they gain no benefit. The third person is like the second person, but sometimes they win against shaitan. It's jihad for them. There's the salah is jihad for them. They're fighting shaitan all the time. Sometimes they win, sometimes they don't. I think we fall into that category, most of us. And the fourth person here is what I would deem to be the Ramadan Muslim. They stand up to pray, they fulfill all the requirements, their heart's fully alert, they don't want to miss anything, they want to focus, they're deeply immersed in the worship. And that is probably what most of us will be in at one point in time. But then Ibn Qayyim, he mentions a fifth person. He says he does everything that the fourth person does, but the difference is that he takes his heart and places it before his Lord, looking at his Lord with his heart and focus on him, filled with love and adoration, as if he actually sees Allah. The waswas and the thoughts are all gone, and the veil is lifted between him and his Lord. And the difference between this fifth person, the first 4, is like the difference between the heavens and the earth. This is why the Prophet ﷺ loved the prayer. It took him to a realm beyond compare. In fact, Ali radiallahu anhu, there was one time his house was on fire. Yeah, people were knocking and shouting like, get out, get out, get out. And then a few minutes later, he gets up and he comes out the house and he's like, "Did you not know that your house was on fire?" And it's like, "Oh, I didn't notice." Like, you guys hear things when you pray? And then, you know, there was one time that he, was doing wudu, and then one of the companions, they were doing wudu. I think it was Ali, I'm not sure. Don't quote me. So they were doing wudu, and his face turned like white out of like fear. And people asked him why he did that. It's like, do you not know who you're about to stand in front of? What you're about to go into is such a big deal. And it's just how it was for the people that came before us. So Salah has a side effect, okay, of being a superpower, like sort of mindfulness or meditation or what you may call it. It's connection and being in the moment, and reflection and introspection with focus on something that will inevitably grant us goodness. Now, the reason why it's a side effect is because the main purpose of Salah is we do it because Allah has commanded us to do it. Okay, there is no other reasons why we should do it, but there's always goodness in things, and this is one of them. So, story of Abu Umama. This is a companion. He was sitting at a time in the Masjid Nabawi, at a time where it made no sense. There were no prayers happening. There were no events happening. Nothing. He was just sitting there. Prophet walked by and he saw him, and he realized this is unusual. Looks like a cry for help. So he goes up to Abu Umama and says, "Yeah, Abu Umama, what's happening? Like, what's wrong?" And Abu Umama, he says, "Ya Rasulullah, I have so much debt that anxiety and sorrow have overwhelmed me, and I'm scared, and I'm scared of being overpowered by men and debt and everything like that." The Prophet looked at him and said, he knew that he was very distressed, because back then the equivalent of what he would be in debt now would be in the millions. Okay, that was his equivalent of how much debt he was in. The Prophet said to him, "Look, shall I give you a few words that if you say, Allah will take care of all your affairs?" He says, "Yes, of course." And then the dua is here. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hazn wal-'ajzi wal-kasal wal-bukhli wal-jubn wa ghalabati ad-dayn wa qahri ar-rijal. And there's variations in the hadith, okay? There's variations. All are acceptable. Allah says here, "Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from anxiety and sorrow, inability, laziness, miserliness and cowardice, the burden of debts and being overpowered by men." So let's break down this hadith. Firstly, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika. Oh Allah, we seek refuge in you. Yes? Why? Because at this point we realize there's nothing we can do. We have no control in this. It's the whole like of mice and men thing, isn't it? We have no control at all. So we seek refuge with Allah. And why do we seek refuge in Allah? Okay, it's so we humble ourselves. He is our master. And who do we seek refuge from with Allah from on a regular basis? From shaitan, right? Absolutely. Every day. Many times. Why? Because anxiety and sorrow, like shaitan, will literally attack you. They're out to get you. Right? It's just how it is. And that's how it feels. And then if you look at al-ajiz or al-kasal, you find that it's like the definition of someone who's got severe depression or mental illness. They find it very difficult to function, no matter how much they want to. They just can't. They can't physically bring them to do it. It's the whole psychosomatic aspect of it. It's why my mum was very unwell physically for so long. Myself as well. Everyone we know that people that have mental illnesses tend to not be able to function properly. And this is what the sort of the root of the issue is. I wouldn't say it's laziness. It's not. It's the sort of the asal here is inability. And the bukhul wal juban, miserliness and cowardice, so not being able to give in charity and not being able to do something for the sake of Allah. The common denominator is inability. What that means is that somebody to give in charity, to go out of your way for the sake of Allah, etc., requires you to come out of your comfort zone. It requires you to go a bit beyond, okay, for it to really, really count as sacrifice. Now, somebody who's already overwhelmed will find it very difficult to do so, to leave that comfort zone. Okay. And of course, the burden of debts and being overpowered by men was the original reason why that spiral for him began. So that's how this dua specifically targets everything. Okay, I would recommend that you incorporate it into your daily adaiya. Afia Project's approach to mental health. This is something that myself and a friend of mine, that original head brother, all those years ago, we created back in 2014 or something. He just talked to me about it. It's a biopsychosocial spiritual model of health. Okay, so it's a four-pronged approach to general wellness and well-being. Okay. So biologically making sure you take over with physical health, If you need to take medications, you need to do that. Exercise is very good, endorphin, sports, etc. Making sure your diet is on point as well. Remember, if your body is good, your mind will be good. Okay, I mean, it's not like confirmed, like it's not 100%, but remember, it will help you long term. And the whole like hormones, endorphins, etc. The next thing is, remember, psychological. Now, why do I say invest in your psyche? Most people, they have gym memberships, etc., but not most people. Most people don't have like regular therapy. Okay, this is something I would suggest that everyone start getting. Like, invest in your psychological well-being, because that will inevitably affect your performance in many things in life and your relationships, etc. And most people, they only really get therapy when things are really bad, and then they expect like an immediate change, and that's not how it works. It's not how it works. Like, you're not going to find an immediate change. It's a gradual change that you will notice over time, and it's only a few years later that you see it. But then most people, they do like 1, 2, 3, 4 sessions and then just give up. They're like, oh, what's the point? Because they've got to the point where it's really bad anyway that they decide to take it. But this, you can take it as a treatment, but you can also take it prophylactically. That makes sense. Writing journals, that helps a lot with, especially for me. Like, I write down thoughts and stuff because I get a lot of thoughts at night, and it helps me sleep. Regularly unwind and have mood lifters. So you need to figure out what's good for you. What actually like makes your mood better. Do things that you enjoy. There's a theory in psychology called the cognitive theory, where if you do things that your brain enjoys or you find happiness from, your psychological well-being will be better, and as a result, your performance physically will be better. And that's individual for you. Okay. Okay. How long do I have? Oh goodness, not long at all. Right. Socially, have a healthy outlet, support network, family, friends, hobbies, ambitions. This is very important. With social people, we really need to make sure that we engage in that. Okay. Don't be somebody who isolates too much. It's okay sometimes. So like, spiritual isolation is great. But which brings us to spiritual isolation. Let's remember, pray on time. Your fard is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The sunnah is for Rasulullah. Again, you'll all get benefit from it. But if you want to do something truly 100% for yourself, is your nawafil. That is where you find something for yourself. You pray your fard because Allah has said so. You pray your sunnah because you are respectful of Rasulullah, and then nafas for yourself. Make sure you get to that point. Don't do nafas if you're not doing the first two. Don't do sunnah if you're not doing fard. It's very important. Yeah, it's one step at a time. Can't go into a PhD before you do your bachelor's, masters, etc. Right? Form a relationship with the Quran, very important. Every day reciting at least a page or so, whatever you got to recite, something. Okay, even if it's listening, whatever. Seek knowledge about Allah. Know your Lord. If you know your Lord, things will be made easier. Know how he responds. Have faith in him. Understand him. And let all your contentment come from him. Remember, everything else in this dunya is temporary. Do not attach yourself to anything here. The only thing that will never fail you, is Allah. And your family will fail you. Your friends will fail you. Your career will fail you. Everything will fail you in some way or another. Allah will never let you down. Okay, this I can promise you. So, final notes: sabr is not just bearing the burden; it's acting upon it without doing anything to anger Allah. Okay, remember, sabr is not just sitting there doing nothing. It means avoiding doing the wrong thing. Okay, this is what's important. Be aware of those around you and learn to love like the Prophet loved. Very important, as we mentioned. Trials and calamities will befall you, 100%. Each one of us, we leave today, we're going to have difficulties, but they're never permanent. Not permanent, and all will be removed. And if it doesn't, you get significant ease in the hereafter. It's very important to have that mentality. True reliance on Allah is submission to the fact that only His mercy can get you out. Pray for mercy. Never pray for a solution, because the mercy will always give you more than the solution. Mental health treatments, like physical treatments, will require you to want to get better. You need to realize that will change your mindset. A change in mindset is very important. The whole concept of mental health therapy, okay, not treatment.